Welcome to the 28th Miami Jewish Film Festival, the largest Jewish film festival in the world. We want to thank all of our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, and all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, SAGE, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all these years. My name is Alan Brick-Turin, oddly both a transportation engineer and a professor of history. I'm excited to be moderating a virtual conversation with director Willy Lindwer from the movie Lost City, which is premiering at this year's festival. So thank you all for joining us. Let me start by saying that this is a tremendously powerful film that delivered a message and recounted the Holocaust in Amsterdam in such an understated way. The viewer was drawn into the story with compelling accounts of the period, spoken from those same places where the story unfolded. The interplay between historical images and the present made the story particularly relevant and enduring. And your own dialogue with writer Willy Lindwer amplified and brought together the story so clearly. So thank you. Now, it's been less than a week since the attacks at the soccer stadium in Amsterdam, referred to as the pogrom, and so I do want to address that in the context of this film, but let's do that a little later. So let me start by asking, you've produced, directed, photographed, and wrote extensively, spanning nearly 40 films on the Holocaust, Israel, the Middle East, Judaism, Christianity, and more. Can you share a little about yourself that perhaps is not as well publicized?
Well, um, share about my ideas about why I did that, why I made these films over all these years. That started already in Film Academy in Amsterdam. I attended Film Academy in Amsterdam in the late 1960s, and I made a film at that time called the Dutch Police, the role of the Dutch police during the wartime. Why I wanted to do that was because I'm Jewish and my parents survived the Holocaust in Amsterdam. And I wanted to make films about the fate of the Jewish people, what happened to us in that period, but also in the past 2000 years. And that was my idea also when I attended Film Academy. I started already with a film. Then I worked about 15 years for Dutch public TV, and I not always had time or possibilities to make films. I made series in Africa and Far East and all over for television. In 85, I started my own company, and the first film I made was The Last 7 Months of Anne Frank, because I wanted to do that film because I felt that we knew everything about the house behind. That was the book that Anne wrote, but the reason why she passed away and what happened to the family after that period, we didn't know. So I started that, and that was the beginning of my first film about the second film, actually, about the Shoah, about the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
And that film won an international Emmy in 1988 because it's the first time that such an idea was developed in a film. And then from that time on, the Dutch television asked me every year to make a film about the Shoah, about the Holocaust, for Holocaust Remembrance Day in the Netherlands. And that's what I did, and that's how I came to many films that I produced since the mid 1980s. It's now about 40 years ago, about many subjects of the Holocaust, both in Holland and outside Holland. I did films about the Wannsee Conference, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and many more. And well, I can continue if you want, but maybe it's already too much.
Well, let me ask you this. This Lost City comes across in part as a familiar cautionary tale of the Jews during the Holocaust: invasion, loss of rights, isolation, and eventually deportation and extermination. How is the story of the Jews in Amsterdam different from other cities across Europe?
Well, Amsterdam was a big city where many Jews lived. There were lived about 80,000 Jews at the beginning of the war, but it was a typical Jewish city. People spoke a kind of a Yiddish here. and also the non-Jewish population, with all the markets that were in Amsterdam, the Jewish markets, that the non-Jews also started to talk about this sort of Yiddish, and that was also called Jerusalem of the West. It had a sort of a nickname, and Moke, Makom, the place to be. And of course, since the 17th century, Amsterdam, there was the Portuguese Jews, of course, that came from Spain and Portugal after the Inquisition to Amsterdam, built their famous synagogue, the Portuguese synagogue, the Esnoga in Amsterdam. And it attracted many more Jews over the centuries to come to this city. So that's why Amsterdam always had a specific name to be a Jewish city. And when my parents are both refugees, they came in 1930. They fled Ukraine and Poland because of anti-Semitism, and they came to Amsterdam because Amsterdam always had the name to be a liberal city. Jews are welcome, a tolerant city over the centuries. That's why my parents came to Amsterdam in 1930. So my background is, I was born in Amsterdam right after the war, but my parents came from there. And they came here because they thought to be here in a free country. And it was so, but only for a short time, unfortunately. They came in 1930, and 10 years later, everything was different. And the thing is, there was never a violent anti-Semitism in the Netherlands. Like in Ukraine, for instance, where you had all these pogroms over all these centuries, but not in Amsterdam. But there was a kind of a silent anti-Semitism, a social anti-Semitism that always was here, meaning that Jews could not enter certain clubs. They were forbidden for Jews. A Jew could never become the mayor of Amsterdam, for instance. It was not possible because he's Jewish, and that was not done. But as I said, violent anti-Semitism was not here, contrary to what's going on today. But that's another story. Maybe we come to that later. But that's the reason why they came, and that's the reason why Amsterdam was a city that people really wanted to visit and come to.
Your juxtaposition between the historic images and the video and then the present day is really striking in this film. Amsterdam of 1942 looks so similar to today. How does the city as a backdrop play into the message you're presenting? That image of the past overlaid on the present.
Look, the question of the Islamization, Islamic people that entered Europe and Amsterdam and Holland, of course, from Morocco and from Turkey, etc. There were always problems with that, towards vis-a-vis Israel and vis-a-vis Jews, and it culminated now in what happened last week here in this city. It has developed over the years, and it's for many years already. Jews are not able to walk with a kippah in Amsterdam. That is dangerous. And you had all those Moroccan or gangs, these guys, young guys, who were difficult. And I remember a rabbi. I was some years ago, while I live now in Israel, and but I'm talking to you from Amsterdam, from my son's house near Amsterdam. I remember we had a rabbi in one of the synagogues here, and one day he ended up in hospital, and I spoke to him a few weeks later, and I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, I went on a Shabbat afternoon. I went to visit some people in the hospital, and I went through a park, and I had my kippah on. I heard some Arabic people, but speaking behind me, and he came from Morocco, this rabbi. So he understood what they were after. And this is already 10, 15, 20 years ago that I'm talking about. And they started to fight with him. But the thing was that this rabbi was a jiu-jitsu champion. And there were 5 guys jumping on him, and all the 5 he hit and was able to get rid of them. One ended up in a small river. So I asked him later, what happened to that guy in the river that you smashed down? He said, I don't know. I just walked on after I did this. But this is already a long time ago. You could not walk with a kippah, and he heard those Moroccan boys talking to him. And this violence, it becomes more and more and more. And it culminated last week in this football game, the soccer game in Amsterdam. Actually,
Mhm.
I attended that soccer game with my grandson from here, and my son lives here. En kan je daarmee stoppen? Met my grandson. And we saw all those police cars. And it was frightening, but during the game, nothing happened. It happened after the game. After the game, when the Israeli soccer fans who came to see the game came to town to the hotels, then it started. It was
Well, let
horrible.
me
It was a big
well let me
pogrom.
ask
We've
you.
seen it all over the world. What?
Well, let
Yeah.
me ask you this in reference to that event. Is the response of the Dutch and the local government and the Dutch people more or less reassuring as compared with what happened in the 1940s?
Well, I don't know. It's very hard to say. I mean, it's of course a different time. In the only thing I can say in 1938 and 1939, people also in Amsterdam were naive and they thought, well, Hitler, okay, he conquered already Poland or Austria, and he will not come to Holland. Nothing will happen. And I feel the same attitude today, that with these millions of Islamic people, of Muslims coming to Europe, and what's going on in Belgium and in France and also in Germany, and then inspired. Many are unfortunately inspired by what happened in Iran with the Ayatollahs, and what they learn and hear in the mosques. Uh, that is, of course, a different case, but history, it's a repetition of history. People also
Okay,
today here are naive and thinking that this is not a big issue that will calm down and it will okay, and they need some more education. But that's exactly the point. They are not educated. They don't want to hear about the Holocaust. They don't want to hear about Jews. They hate Israel. It's all of that, and that you have here in Holland. And not only, as I said, in Holland, but also all over Europe.
sure.
And that will become increased, to my opinion, it will increase. And we are, on the moment, in a bad situation. It's about what's going on in the Middle East, in Israel, Iran, and then, of course, not to speak about Putin and North Korea and China and all of that. It's not helping. It's not
Sure.
helping.
Well, let me get back to something very specific in the
Yes.
film. As a transit engineer, I couldn't help but notice the tram vehicles. You talked within a tram that looked to be a vintage vehicle. Are those trams still in use today? And secondarily, do they bear witness to the atrocities of the period? Do they evoke emotions from the survivors, much as some of the people who spoke talked about the Beethoven Land Stop with the film subject? The trams played an integral role in this film as silent actors. Can you talk a little about that?
Sure. Well, when I started the project 5 years ago, my question was: there lived 80,000 Jews in Amsterdam in 1940, and how was it possible within 1.5 year, 2 years, to deport all these Jews out of the city? And we know that Dutch police helped, and we know that. Um, uh, but there must have been an infrastructure. And that is what I wanted to know, how was it done? We knew that the tram and the bus played a role, but not in such a way that we discovered. And then after research, I discovered all those invoices. That was for me the main
Mm-hmm.
point. I discovered in the archives here something like 24 invoices that were written, were sent to the Dutch, to the Nazis in Amsterdam, for the help and the deportations and all the trams that were ordered by the Nazis to deport Jews from certain parts of Amsterdam to the train stations on their way to the extermination camps. And I was amazed when I had these, because on these invoices, I read all the places. You can see all the places from where they were deported from, and also
Yes.
that it was not the Nazis didn't allow people after 8 o'clock in town in dark, um, uh, but only an exemption was for the tram drivers. They could come and drive away Jews. And I did not know, and also Guus Luiters, my co-host in the project and the film, he is a writer. He writes already 50 years about the Shoah. We were both amazed. He is also from Amsterdam. He is not Jewish, but we did the project together. Um, um, Amazed how the role of the Amsterdam tram, and nobody ignored it. I mean, everybody saw it. Nobody said anything. There was never any moment that there was the resistance tried to stop trams. They went every day, months in, months out, until the last month. It was August 1944. That was the last invoice that I have. It's all in the film. That was based, and that is why I came up with the idea to find an old tram, and there is a tram museum, and that was a big effort to organize a tram from the 1940s that is still there from the wartime, and they were willing to help us, and we drove with that tram to Amsterdam. That particular tram, that same tram that drove Jews in 1942, 43 and there were many of these trams, hundreds of them, because you cannot take out 80,000 people in such a short time. There were hundreds of trams. Now, and that is what we did. We made the same tram ride. We went to the same tram stations where the Jews were picked up. And there was one tram stop where 20,000 Jews, we know that from that particular tram stop, 20,000 Jews were deported. And today in Beethovenstraat. And today we call them the guilty spots in town. Nobody knows anything anymore from these particular places in Amsterdam where so much dramatic events happened. And that is what we developed in the film. And I was able to find eyewitnesses and survivors who were deported from these tram sites and from their houses in Amsterdam, and then brought to the tram, and then on their way to the Nazi concentration camps, to train stations, and so on. So that was my idea, and it was quite a shock in Amsterdam and in Holland. Nobody knew about that role from the tram, and that the tram organization earned so much money with it, and the money that was paid by the Nazis to the tram, to the tram of Amsterdam, was paid from stolen money, the money that they stole from the Jews. So that's it. And maybe I can give you the last one, the last ride in that film. The last you'll see in the film how Guus Luiters and myself, how we drive through town, and where you have all these eyewitness accounts from all these people, and so on, dramatic stories, all of them.
Yes.
But since I made that film in 1988 about Anne Frank, suddenly I saw on the last invoice August 1944. I said, but that is, and then August 8, 1944, the tram ride from the prison to the central station. I said, my gosh, this is the tram ride that the family Frank was on. Nobody knew that. So I checked it, I saw it. I found even the list of people who were on that tram from the prison where Anne Frank and her family was on the 8th of August 1944, on the way to the tram. So that's how we were able to reconstruct that last part. And we know now that also Anne Frank and her family, her parents and her sister Margot, the last thing they saw from Amsterdam was the tram.
So why did the GVB, the tram company, participate in the deportations? Were they willing participants, or were they reluctant? Because you talk about the Dutch people, for the most part, being reluctant, not the police, not certain collaborators, but the tram company. What was their position on this?
They collaborated. I mean, there were so many collaborators. As you say rightly, the police, but also there were many betrayers. You had all kinds of people, also in Holland, who said, okay, Jews, fine. Although you can be 400 years in Holland since 1600, but you're still not Dutch. You're Jewish, and they don't care. So that is my conclusion to all of that, because the tram never went on a strike. There was a strike, yes, in February
Yes.
1941 for one day, but that was long before the deportation started. That was the only time that the tram had a strike in February 1941. After that, and when the deportation started in mid-July 1942, until August 44, every day they brought away Jews, and there was no tram driver who said, "No, I'm not doing that," or whatever. Of course, they must have known that these poor people didn't went on a vacation or so,
Right.
They must have seen it. They must have known. They know that the Nazis were killing people in the whole of Europe. So it was known. Even maybe they didn't know about the concentration camp, what happened there, but that they didn't bring them to a vacation, that is
Right.
for sure. But they did it. And then without
But you,
any attempt, they did it.
so your film focuses on the first-hand accounts, but there's nobody speaking from the tram company. Now, likely no employees survived, but other than the accounting of the trips and the passengers and a brief statement at the end about the director not questioned on his role in the affair, the
Mhm.
voice of the GVB is absent. Is that a missing piece? Does that add to the story? Did you try to talk to anyone?
Now, you gave the answer all yourself. I couldn't find any GVB. I did. For 2.5 years, I went to the GVB, the pensioned group, the group that there was
Uh,
a kind of an organization of pensioned GVB drivers and so on. I went to all of them, and I know of none of them who was alive, who was in during the wartime, a driver or working for them. And I must say, in years ago, I made another film, made, as you know, a number of films. There was another film that I did. I had in that film, indeed, one tram driver. He is in that film, made that 25 years ago, but I decided not to use it. I
mhm.
wanted the voice. I wanted the voice of those of the survivors, I show the invoices. We did the whole tour and trip, and for me that was it. I didn't even want him in. I in almost all of my films, I never have the people that did this dirty job. I have only my films are mainly made of interviews and talk to people who
Mhm.
Jews who underwent this horrible things and so I decided not to do it. And as you said, I couldn't find anyone alive anymore.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
to find a tram was impressive enough. So let me ask you this: what else would you like to tell us about the film that hasn't come out in our discussion? We've had a lot of time, but there's always an element that perhaps I've missed that you'd like to share with us.
Wow. A little bit. That's a difficult question because look, I worked with Guus and with a team with Professor Johannes Houwing ten Kate. I have to mention his name. He was my right hand and my historical advisor for 35 years. We did a lot together, and this is the final story that I'm making on the Shoah. I'm 78 now, almost 79. It's for me. This is it, and this is my what was it? The 25th film about the Shoah that I made. I can say that if I look back about the 5 years that we worked on it, we were lucky that we were able to find those invoices that nobody had seen before. We were lucky that we could find those last survivors who could speak about the fact that they were on these trams. I was lucky to find all of these elements and to bring them together and to show even the old original tram from 1943 and 4. So this was for me, I mean, my final story, and I must say, when I look back, I cannot say that I missed out something or whatever. This is it. It's a 1.5 hour film, and I hope that it it will be seen. I can tell you one more thing, that when the film came out in March of this year, in March 2024. The film came out. There was the opening at the National Holocaust Museum in Amsterdam.
Mhm.
And during that opening of the National Holocaust Museum, Amsterdam, there were a lot of troubles with people, Palestine, demonstrations in front of the Portuguese synagogue where the opening was. And my film came out a day later. That was on March 10, and my film came out on March 11 because we did it in collaboration with the National Holocaust Museum of Amsterdam. And there was immediately the mayor of Amsterdam, and they were all attacked of the fact, why did you allow a protest of Palestine, a pro-Palestine protest during the opening or next to the building of the opening of the National Holocaust Museum? Why did you do that? So immediately, a few days later, there was a meeting with the Jewish community, and the mayor decided that my film, this film Lost City, will be shown in all the schools in Amsterdam to teach, and that happened. The film was shown in all in the months afterwards in all the schools. There was another screening in cinemas for school children. And I was very pleased with that. At least that it has an educational element to it. But look, we have to be realistic. If that really helps, and if it really helps that young Muslim kids here in Amsterdam and all over Europe learn from this, I doubt it. At home, they hear other stories. And they don't want to hear anything about the Holocaust. They don't want to know about the Jews. And so on. But I was very pleased that the mayor picked it up, and more so and a number of tram stops in Amsterdam, there will be placed big plaques, mentioning that in 1942 and 3, so and so thousand Jews were deported from this particular place, and that will be. These plaques are placed now, and on January 27, that's the International Holocaust Day, they will be officially inaugurated by the mayor and by myself, and I'm pleased with that. At least that something came out of the film that to commemorate the Jews that were deported from Amsterdam, and to show these what we call guilty places in town, those tram stops where so many Jews were deported from.
So thank you to director Willy Lindwer for the movie Lost City for joining us. Once again, thank you to all of our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, and all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, SAGE, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all of these years. And thank you, our audience, for participating in the 28th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival.
Very much.